Okay, great. I'm Bryan Farkas, and I'm the Executive Director of the West Virginia Conservation Agency. The Conservation Agency is the administrative office of the State Conservation Committee. And I'm a state agency, I'm a state official, and it is my job to work with the local conservation districts. As a matter of fact, their money comes through me, and every year I go to the legislature and lobby for conservation funding in West Virginia. Just to give you a quick overview of conservation in the state, we have 114 elected conservation district supervisors. They are generally in districts ranging in size from 1 county to 6 counties. We have 55 counties in the state. They are elected on general election ballot. The reason why they are elected came down to an ethics issue that was the result of unelected shoebox officials making eminent domain decisions for the construction of small watershed flood control dams. And so the federal judge said, West Virginia, you figure this out. And if you don't figure this out, I'll figure it out for you. So the legislature in the early 2000s said, oh, well, hell, let's just make them all nonpartisan elected, just like school boards. So our supervisors serve 4-year terms. Every 2 years, they're up for election. So I'm fairly new to conservation. I'm not new to government. I worked for the DNR, and then I worked for DEP. At conservation, I started about, in July, 6 years. And so when I came to conservation, it was apparent to me that there were some issues out in conservation, in the conservation districts. And that was only confirmed to me when our Attorney General issued an opinion that said conservation districts were operating and they didn't have any authority by law to do some of the things that they were doing. So that made me wonder, well, what do conservation district supervisors think their job is? So I went out and I did a listening session. And I went to all 14 conservation districts and I asked them to sit down and give me 2 hours of dedicated time to answer these 4 questions. And they were very simple questions. What's your role? What's the role of the district? What do you see the challenges over the next decade? And what do we have to do in order to change them? And so the purpose of this was to help them start thinking about their districts and also to start thinking about what they needed to do in their annual plans of works to start addressing this. Because I was seeing plan of works like show up, make coffee, do it again the next day. And that was not, I mean, that's a plan of work, but it's not the plan that we have been told that is the all. I mean, if that's democracy at the local level, well, we got some problems. So I went out and I asked them to, and we sat down and they all took this very seriously because a lot of them saw the value in the discussion. And since we had set apart some special time for this, we weren't competing with their normal monthly business. Now let me tell you a little bit about West Virginia before I show you the answers. West Virginia, if you're not familiar with it, is a state that is the most southern northern state, the most western eastern state, the most eastern western state, and the most northern southern state. We are right smack in the middle of everything. Our state motto is almost heaven, and when you come there you can see it. We're also known as the mountain state because we are mountains. We have Allegheny front. We can't compete with the high ridges of Colorado and the other states in the west. But because we are the mountain state, we also get the moniker of hillbilly. The national food is cornbread and beans, and it's very good. You should try it with onions and relish. But the other thing that we are that doesn't get recognition is that we are farmers. West Virginia has the highest percentage in the nation of small farms. And we also have the highest percentage of family-owned farms. And so when you look at that in context of this discussion that we were having with district supervisors, it makes conservation in West Virginia much more focused because we are dealing with small farmers who have farms an average of about 170 acres and less. And as I drove here from West Virginia, it's a 14-hour drive. And I like the drive because I get to see farmland that I don't see. Our farmland starts at the top of the ridge and goes down. And you know it rolls downhill. So the first question we asked supervisors was, what's the role of Conservation District Supervisor? And as you can see in this, it's kind of self-evident, conservation. But they focused in on education. They believe that the role of a Conservation District Supervisor is to be educated through self-education and then take that education and turn it on to the next generation or turn it on to their peers in the farming community. Sorry about that. The next is, what should the role of a Conservation District be then? And again, you see education. And to provide and to promote. But it all comes back to education. They view their jobs, the district jobs, as that they're educators. That's their number one job. And as a matter of fact, it is interesting that the State Attorney General's opinion said they don't have the authority to be educators. They cannot use the dollars that go to the districts, the state funds, for education programs. They can use it only to benefit cooperators and owners and occupiers of the land. They could not work with 4-H groups. They could not work with FFA. They could not work with watershed groups. They could only work with cooperators and occupiers of the land based on West Virginia law. So the next question then is, what do you see of the role, what's the issue that we're going to have to face for conservation over the next decade? And it is interesting to me that water in a headwater state jumps out as their number one issue. It's not soil, it's water. And it is the conservation of water. And in there, you can make the argument that, okay, sediment is a problem, water pollution through sediment, and that is one of our missions. But they are greatly concerned about water, and that is where they want to start focusing their efforts through small watershed implementation plans, through our flood control structures, and we have 170 of those in the state. And of those 170, 169 are high hazard. And if you're into that business, that just means that if one of them were to fail, people are going to die. So, doesn't mean that the dams are in bad shape. It's just a hazard classification. So they are greatly aware of what they are. And then they also see regulation creeping in into the conservation. You know, we heard about Ohio and what was going on in Ohio. Well, because of water, my supervisors are greatly worried about the waters of the U.S. They are very consumed with that. Every time I talk to them, they go, well, what's the status of that? And then you tell them, and then 2 hours later, what's the status of it? The average age of my supervisors is 75. So, they are greatly concerned, and it shows up in the comments that we gave them, that they gave to us. And then regulation in agriculture. But as you see that, water, regulation, and agriculture, these word charts are defined that the bigger the word, the more emphasis and the more times the word was mentioned. So as you can see, agriculture kind of goes slower. It's water and regulation that they're concerned with. And so then we finally say to them, so what is it going to take to make this, what are you going to do to address these changes? And it's education. They believe that their role is educators, and as an educator, they have to start telling people the story of this is how we're going to preserve our water resources in the state of West Virginia, and it's going to be through education, it's going to be through farm days, it's going to be through field visits, it's going to be through outreach. And the good thing about that is that now we're starting to see creeping into these annual plans of work, expanding their sphere outside of just the people at their meetings. They are now incorporating watershed groups, because before they were tree huggers. And now they see that they are partners, and they are also looking at the DNR and the DEP, the Environmental Protection Agency, Natural Resources Agency, but more importantly, they're also reaching out to their local communities, their county commissions, their municipal governments, and looking to see how they can put projects together. And that has worked very well in the Eastern Panhandle. For people in the eastern part of the state, eastern part of the United States, we have the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load pollution diet, and West Virginia is in it. And so we see conservation districts that are located in that TMDL. They're reaching out to local governments to try and implement 319 programs in there in order to stop non-point source pollution, so they have more, again, protecting water quality as they move forward. So that is my story. I know we can't take questions, but thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today.